This podcast is sponsored by Release Winery. Every wine tells a story. Each growing season, it's our goal to create an artisan Napa Valley wine of exceptional quality. Join us as the story of this ultra-limited wine continues. Learn more at releasewinery.com.
From Milwaukee.
Yes, I am back in my hometown. Well, I was actually born in Waukesha, but lived most of my life in Whitefish Bay. I left in the early 60s to go west to school. And when I left, Milwaukee was kind of a stodgy town, but I come back now and it's hip. I went to college at Stanford and got a great liberal arts education. They told me, you can do anything with a liberal arts education. And I think I'm living proof that that's true.
Yeah.
It came out of nowhere, this idea, and I thought he was nuts. But, you know, I was a good wife, and I wanted to be supportive. So we went to Oregon, which is where we were coming from school. He went to graduate school in North Carolina, and we were crossing the country back to Oregon, where he had taken a position. And that's why we were going to Oregon. And he came up with this idea. And all the way back as we drove across the country in our Volkswagen camper bus, I should say we camped across the country.
Wow.
This idea kept coming up. And the more we talked about it, the more interesting it became. And when we got to Oregon, we started looking around, and we found that we thought we were unique. I mean, who ever thought of doing this? There was a handful of other young couples who were thinking the same thing, and we became friends, and we all started about the same time. I mean, there was a handful. The whole industry fit in our living room at the time. So there were, maybe 5 couples. And we started talking to each other and collaborating because growing grapes in Oregon was different than growing grapes in California or different from growing grapes in Burgundy. So we essentially wrote the book on how to grow grapes in Oregon. And it took years and years to, at that time the world wasn't ready for Oregon Pinot Noir. And when Bill and I used to go on marketing trips, we'd have to take a map to show where Oregon was. So we've come a long way in the space of one generation, which I think is really wonderful. There are now, I think, 725 wineries in Oregon. We pump over $3.5 billion into the Oregon economy, employ more than 20,000 employees. It's an industry that didn't exist when we started.
Isn't it?
Well, it is a lousy business plan. And I like to tell people, particularly when I talk to students, that our story should give all budding entrepreneurs hope, because we were 2 liberal arts graduates with no agricultural or business training who decided to start an agricultural business. We wanted to grow a grape, Pinot Noir, that had never done well in the United States, and we decided to locate in Oregon, which had no wine industry. So the fact that we are, as I said, a $3.5 billion business with all the Oregon wine industry people now, and our second generation is now running the show, and we are distributed internationally, shows that miracles happen.
Didn't they?
Well, that's so interesting to hear you say that, because when we got to the point where we had to give our vineyard a name, we tried to think of a name that would make people want to just grab the bottle off the shelf, and we came up with all kinds of names, none family names, but just all kinds of names, and none of them seemed right. And finally, we hired a marketing consultant, and he said, name it after yourselves. It's your baby. And we thought, wow, if Orville Redenbacher could make a success with a name like that, maybe Sokol Blosser wouldn't be so bad. And then, so we named it Sokol Blosser. Sokol was my maiden name, and I married Bill Blosser. So that's the two family names. And people would say, okay, Blosser, how come her name's first? And it really was a marketing decision because we called ourselves SB Winery. So if it had been Blosser Sokol, it wouldn't have worked.
Your choice.
Well, it was partly our love of Pinot Noir, but also when we got to Oregon, we looked at the climate. It's on the 45th parallel, which is very similar to Burgundy. And there was one of the early pioneers, Chuck Curry, who's no longer alive, who actually left the industry quite early. But he had, when he was at Davis for graduate school, done a paper on the climate connection between Burgundy and Oregon and showed that it should work. So, we did, one of the things liberal arts graduates know how to do is research. So we did research and we found that, and that spurred us on. Sometimes I tell people we had more guts than brains, but we made the kind of decision you make when you're in your mid-20s and you're willing to risk everything. You don't have a lot to lose, so it's easy to risk everything. And it was an adventure. It was a challenge. We decided to stay in Oregon rather than going to California, which already had a wine industry, because not only was it less expensive to be in Oregon at that time, and of course it still is, but we liked the challenge of being on the ground floor of something that had great potential.
Yeah, you were definitely on the ground.
This podcast is sponsored by Release Winery. Every wine tells a story. Each growing season, it's our goal to create an artisan Napa Valley wine of exceptional quality. Join us as the story of this ultra-limited wine continues. Learn more at releasewinery.com.